Hello, my name is Chris Rogan. Welcome to Focus on the Arts. This is the second in a series of programs we're doing highlighting and featuring artists and historians from the Wayne County area. This program is being brought to you through the support of Indiana University East. Today we're coming to you from the Wayne County Historical Museum, which is at the corner of North 12th and A. We have several guests on our agenda for today that will be talking to us about the jazz history that we have right here in our own community. Our first guest is Jim Wechter, who is the historian and curator at the Wayne County Historical Museum. Thanks, Jim, for being with us today.
You're welcome.
I appreciate this very much.
Glad to be here.
What is your job description here? What exactly does a curator do?
The curator does it. No, in most cases, a curator is responsible for maintaining and taking care of the collections. At the Wayne County Museum, the curator maintains and takes care of the collections, develops displays, takes care of the storage, accessions, all the things related to it. So
this is a full-time job.
It's a full-time job, and actually, we should have about 6 people doing the same amount of work.
Well, we have you. You're doing it all.
Yeah, I mean myself.
We have here in the museum.
It's underway. It's a small collection right now. I'd like to see it grow a lot more. With the rich jazz history that we have in the area, the museum is, a very good archive and a good repository to maintain materials. And we've got a good supply of, started a good supply of records. We have a number of photographs, a lot of documentation that we're slowly accumulating.
Well, I'm assuming the more you have, the more you get, the more people realize that.
The better, yeah,
right.
And the better the collection can be, because we do get people from all over, literally all over the world, to come here to the museum and to Richmond to look at the Jeanette record facilities and as they were and as they are, and also just to study the materials. So we have a lot of requests for information and all that, and the more material that we can acquire, the better, and it gives it a central location, makes us I think a good central repository for it.
And it's a beautiful display here. It's really very nice. I teach a jazz history class out at IU East, and I'm always surprised by the number of people who don't know that we've got this heritage right here.
I'm really surprised, and I had some high school students at Richmond High School doing a paper on jazz history, and they had no idea that this.
And Richmond probably kept coming up in their
Richmond kept
research.
Coming up, and they came to the museum and said, "You've got all of this? Wow!" And so they were really enthused about it.
There's lots of communities that are looking for something to have as a heritage, and this is an automatic right here.
Wherever you go and you say jazz, people just can't believe. They say, "Richmond, oh yeah, the Jeanettes."
And they recognize that.
Oh yeah, we had some people here from Connecticut who came specifically to Richmond because they knew the Jeanettes recorded here. And they were just excited that we had this stuff.
That's wonderful. What do you find of interest that we've got in our specific collection here? We have recordings, we have star pianos I notice around here. Other things that people are offering to you?
We're acquiring a good collection. From the star side, we have a number of star pianos. We've got a small grand. We've got a large mid-1800s, what they call an upright grand. We just acquired a Chase square grand that was given to us in December, and that is the predecessor to the star.
Chase was the company that originally built down in the Gorge?
Well, the original Gorge pianos were the Tracers, and then it became Chase. And I think Sam Meyer, who's our resident walking encyclopedia, is our expert on those, and whenever I get a question on that, I call Sam. But
well, he's walking knowledge.
Following me.
Right, right.
So.
Well, we're also hoping to go into the Gorge today and bring you some footage of what remains down there. Unfortunately, it's quite a bit of rubble at this point, but there is an ongoing movement to get a museum-type atmosphere going down there. What's your thoughts about that?
It's a great facility, as far as preserving what's there and putting together walking tours, I think, and highlighting what was there originally. From a standpoint of archival, as far as papers, documents, related material like that, I think we have a good collection going, and I like to see that expand here. So
well, your basement's full, I understand, of recordings that people have donated?
A lot of records, but not near everything that we should have. There's a lot of artists that recorded here locally, local people, a lot of
big names.
Big names,
yeah.
and some very big names that were Richmond natives that recorded here and went on to bigger and better things, and all the obscure things too. The recordings of very famous people that everything from people that went on to be president. Well, we were talking about William Jennings Bryan recorded here, and various people. He ran for president several times, didn't get it, but a number of other people of note recorded here whose just recitations or speeches, ministers, various people that were well known, but not from the standpoint of just started music. But,
and you have some of these on recording?
We have some, and we're trying to find more, because that part of it is just as important as the music part of it.
Well, if you don't know and you haven't come down to the Wayne County Museum lately, this is right inside the front door, and it's quite an interesting collection of things. Our next person that we're going to talk to is Sam Meyer. He'll be discussing the history of the jazz recording industry here in Richmond. Thank you very much, Jim, for talking with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Our featured guest for today is Sam Meyer. Sam is a local jazz historian and music enthusiast. Sam, it's really nice to have you with us here today. Thanks for coming.
I'm glad to be here.
I've met you through several music history classes and jazz classes that I've taught before, and I find you to be like a walking encyclopedia about all of this jazz heritage stuff. How did you get interested and involved in all of this?
Well, I've loved music all of my life, and when I was a kid, I tried to imitate people on records. My hero was Washboard Sam, and that's where the nickname came from.
Is that where you were named from?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. And you grew up here, right? You're from this area? And I understand when you were a child, you would like walk past some of the bars and places. I don't mean to say that you're a child walking, but places that were featuring music and musicians and just kind of stuck in your ear.
Yeah, well, they were restaurants that happened to sell beer, which was illegal at the time, but they sold it anyway, and they always had music in there, and wonderful musicians who would come to town to record for the Jeanettes.
But you haven't always been here. You kind of left the area for a while and have recently come back in the last decade or so, is that right? How did you become interested in the historical Star Jeanette district and the stuff that's going on in the Gorge?
Well, I've always loved history. 20 minutes after I was born, I was longing for the good old days. So
Already?
Yes, already. I really liked...
Well, wasn't that the good old days back then?
Yeah, although I believe what Carly Simon said a few years ago, these are the good old days. I do live in the here and now, but I love to listen to records from the 20s and 30s and that sort of thing. And as you know, I have a radio show where I
on WMUB out of Oxford with Mama Jazz, right?
Yes, she's on at night from 8 to midnight, but I do shows with her also. And then I have my own on Saturday afternoon, Sam's Place.
Sam's Place.
Come on by.
What can you tell us about the history of how the Jeanette Record Company came about and built in the Gorge and came to this location?
Well, it was kind of a natural evolution. The Jeanettes owned a lot of music stores all over this part of the country, and they were beginning to expand, and that they heard, well, wherever, that there was a piano manufacturing thing here that was for sale. So they came in and bought 50% of it, and within a matter of, I think, 3 or 4 years, they bought up the rest of it.
That was Star at the time? Or
yes,
was it Chase at the time?
No, it was a Star. It hadn't been Star very long. It had been Chase about 8 or 9 years before that. Then they had a disastrous fire down there in 1893, and the Jeanettes decided not only to rebuild, but to expand.
And how many years was the recording studio up and running?
Well, they went into the recording business because they were already in the phonograph business, and at first they called them Star Records and sold them in their piano stores all over the country, and then they decided to switch to Jeanette so that they could sell them every place.
And this was one of the main recording areas. I mean, other than New York and Chicago, this was it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like major stars were coming here.
The Jeanettes used a process that they had kind of borrowed from the Victor Talking Machine Company, and Victor sued them over that, and it went through the courts and all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Jeanettes won the case. And so from then on, they really expanded in the recording field. And they had a lot of stores in Chicago, and of course at that time there was great music there.
Sure.
And they brought most of these
the Dixieland stuff had traveled up from New Orleans and was really making a name for itself in Chicago at that time.
Yes, and so they brought all of these people here. They had a man who was from Richmond, but he ran the stores in Chicago for them, and they brought a lot of wonderful people here. Some of their first recordings of Louis Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton, people like that.
In Richmond?
In Richmond, Indiana.
That's great, that's great. How when did the studios and the piano manufacturing plants shut down, and why? Why did it stop happening here?
Well, the Depression stopped about everybody, and there were very few record companies that survived that. And the Jeanettes, of course, were one of the casualties of all that. they sold what few masters they had left about 1934 to the Decca Record Company. And Decca was just opening up. They had plenty of money, evidently, and they expanded all over the place. And of course, they had one big star, Bing Crosby, who was the man at the time. I'm talking about 1934. And they used the Jeanette pressing plant for Decca Records.
And what are your thoughts about the preservation of the Gorge area and what we should be doing for Richmond's heritage with that?
I think we've trashed enough of our history. Let's preserve it.
Enough already, right?
Yes.
And there is an ongoing project to see it restored.
Yes.
Is that true?
And this is the first century where it's been recorded, filmed, etc., where we have this history. So let's preserve as much as we can, because the Jeanettes did a lot of the spoken word. William Jennings Bryan recorded down there, for instance, people like that. Plus, music went from one extreme to the other. They did everything.
And I understand that even though the Jeanette family is no longer in this area, they're still very much aware of what's going on and very supportive of the plans that Richmond has to preserve this. Is that...
Yes, one of the Jeanette grandchildren decided that's what he wanted to do, but unfortunately he died. But his wife is carrying on this tradition, and she got the Jeanettes together for the very first time.
She was just here a few weeks ago, right?
Yes, right. And they had a reunion last October, and it was wonderful.
That's great. You were there?
Yes, and the Jeanettes, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren had never met.
No kidding. Where are they? Most of them are just spread out throughout the country?
The whole country, yeah. Vermont, Connecticut, Florida, Nashville, Cincinnati, Lafayette, Indiana, Indianapolis, Indiana.
But none of them are here any longer.
There is one Jeanette in town.
And what is the status of the Gorge project right now? Do you know? I know Garrett Boone and you have both been working very hard, and lottery money has been allocated through the state.
Yes.
And there's a plan to put up museums or to restore some of the companies that are down there?
Well, I think they'd like to restore the recording studio, or rebuild the recording studio. And then, of course, there's so much here to see in the Wayne County Historical Museum that then maybe later on they can expand when they get more things into perhaps the Jeanette home or down there.
And the Jeanette home is the building at the corner of South 18th and East Main.
Right.
Is that my understanding?
Yes, the World Life Insurance Building is the old Jeanette Homes, built 1900 by Henry Jeanette.
Now, there's a model that's been made, a three-dimensional model of,
yes,
of the plans for the Gorge area. Is that, I'm hoping we're going to feature that on this program.
I think you can, yes. It's at Garrett Boone's at the moment, and you can run right down there and photograph it anytime you like.
Well, we hope to do that. Sam came to us just recently, like I said, in the last couple of years, from the West Coast. Sam not only has a history and a background in jazz, but he also was, I think the title is a script doctor in Los Angeles. That must have been a fascinating type of job. How did you get into that?
I just kind of walked into it. It was pretty much of an accident, really, and I began to sell a few things to some stand-up comedians, and then I worked on a movie that became somewhat of a cult hit. It's called Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
That's a big hit. Yeah. We've all heard of that. That's
then I was off and running from there.
And how did you get into that? I mean, did you have people that were in the business that you knew when you went out there?
Yes. There was a lady who was working on that. She was a friend of the director and the producer. His name was Bob Ulrich.
It's who you know, isn't it?
Exactly. And, well, and she wasn't funny at all. She could do serious things, and she was wonderful at it. But she was not funny, so she borrowed funny and this semi-bizarre.
And you have kind of a funny, bizarre sense of humor, from what I understand.
Afraid so. There
was an article written on Sam a couple of years ago in the Palladium that talked about insert humor here, that you would get actual scripts that say, yes, we really need something right here to happen, and you would just make up a joke?
Yeah, or pull out of the past.
As inspired to do?
Sure. My relatives are all rather strange, and fortunately I remember so many of the things that they said, and I only have to add a word here and there. And
I would guess that would work in some modern-day comedies. Addams Family was one of them that you inserted some humor for?
Yeah, one of the lines in there.
Give us the best line. I love this line.
Let's see. It's where Morticia says to Gomez, don't torture yourself, Gomez. That's my job.
I think I've said that to my husband.
Well, my Aunt Bessie said that to my Uncle Louis a lot of years ago.
Well, it's nice to make use of that family background that you've got for comedy. What are some of the names of the people that you worked with in Hollywood? And do you miss it? Is that a place that you wish you were still residing? What
I miss is probably what used to be, not what is right now. There's so much violence in that city that, and it's turned into so much of more of a business than it ever was, and a ruthless type thing. And there's just not much of a place for me to work out there anymore.
But you still send scripts?
Oh yeah, I still work,
travel
yes.
out there several times a year.
I'll be there in 2 weeks to work.
On
a thing for Steve Martin.
He says Steve Martin like that's just Steve Martin. Steve Martin, the comedian, what's he like to work with?
Well, I work mostly with his secretary or whoever else is writing, and like that. He's always been very nice to me, and like that.
Drop dead funny, Steve Martin. And you've worked with Oliver Stone?
Yes.
Right? And I understand you have several TV Emmys also from
2
shows such as?
But I've been nominated 6 times.
Oh, 4?
For Hogan's Heroes and for Get Smart.
See, now I grew up with those shows. Those were funny. I mean, back when the sitcoms were funny. They're not so entertaining these days sometimes, but really good humor inserted in those shows.
Well, had to be. We couldn't use the language that they can use nowadays.
And what are you doing here now on a daily basis?
On a daily basis?
If I can ask.
Sure. Well, I have my radio show that I do every Saturday, and I sometimes talk about jazz all over the place, and I try to collect as many records as I possibly can.
And you have quite a collection of your own, don't you?
Yes, which will end up here as part of it.
Do I understand you just bought a couple of jukeboxes?
3 jukeboxes, yes.
That's wonderful.
A 1931 Mills and a 1935 something or other that I've forgotten, and a 1939 jukebox.
Now, don't people hire you also to narrate films and recognize some of the jazz artists that might be in films?
Yes, I'm a
I hate to say that people weren't around long enough to know, and you know. I don't want to imply anything, but...
Oh, that's all right. No, just say it. I'm working this coming Sunday in Cincinnati for the Cincinnati Historical and Preservation something or other, and I'm narrating some films there for them. It's a benefit for them.
That's great. Now, let's go down to the Gorge and take a look at what remains of Richmond's jazz history. We're down in the Gorge now with Sam. What are some of the buildings that we see right now off to our right?
That is the office building of the Star Piano Company and Jeanette Records, and the reason that part is standing is because that's the vaults. The Jeanettes didn't use checks, they paid in cash.
I see. That's all that's left.
Yep.
Hard to tear down.
Yeah, Frank couldn't get that one down.
And this building right here with the label on it for Jeanette Records?
The first 2 or 3 floors were pressing records, and the Speedy Q sound effects department was in there. They made most of the sound effects for every radio show in the country, and a lot of them all over the world, really. Then the top floors were where they made the assembled the actions for the pianos.
And my understanding about this preserved area is this is where recording started, and this is basically all we have left in this country of recording history.
Right.
Right? Building-wise of what's left.
Building-wise, yes, because the Jeanettes started recording in 1916, and by 1927, 28, they were second largest in the world.
And off to our left here, this is foundation left over from...
This was the piano assembly plant here, where they put the wood together.
And there was a lumber yard that was nearby behind us, right?
The lumber yard was behind the office. These are the tracks that we're standing on right here.
Provided for the wood for the pianos?
Yes, they dried their own wood, one of the few places around that did.
We're walking on what used to be tracks that went right past the piano factory and down again to the recording studio.
Yes.
Anything left of this building over here, what was this?
This was a record pressing plant also. In 1934, they started leasing it to Brunswick and Decca Records, and it ran around the clock, 2 and 3 shifts usually, and they shipped all over the world from right here.
This was a very busy place, like buildings high up on both sides, so that it was kind of dark and busy industry down here.
It was busy down here, yes. Night and day, the place was jumping.
The smokestack here was for coal?
Yes, they went to coal in 1893 after they had used water power up to and including that time. The mill race ran right across here just to the left of us.
And what do we have along here from remnants of what's left?
This was where the shipping department was for the record companies that were down here. Jeanette recorded for a lot of different people over a period of time. And this is the loading docks right here. And the building just the other side of it is the original 1872 building.
And just because we see no more foundation, this was all full of buildings, this whole alongside too.
It was all full of buildings, yes. 3- and 4-story buildings. The recording studio or the pressing plant back here was 6 floors and on both sides of the street, and ran around the clock.
And what's the concrete building that we're coming upon? What was the original plan for that?
We used to call it the government building because that's where they made wings and wooden propellers for airplanes during World War I. Then the government sold it to the Jeanettes, and they moved in and made pianos and like that in there.
That's where you were tuning as a kid?
That's where I was tuning as a kid, just this side of that.
And what's this left over from?
Oh, this is again part of the 1872 building. Yeah, and there's nothing left of the recording studio except part of the flood wall, which was the foundation for the recording studio.
And now we're going to meet up with Mrs. Laurel Martin, the wife of Henry Jeanette Martin, and Duncan Sheet. Now we're coming upon where they actually did the recording studio. Is that right in this area?
Yes, the railroad tracks ran right along here, and the recording studio was part of the foundation was the flood wall there.
It's a very narrow building.
To there.
Right up.
Yeah, very narrow and long, yeah. And the recording equipment was in this side right over here. And this is the spot where Louis...
I was going to say, who would have been standing right on this spot?
Louis, Bix, King Oliver, Jelly Roll Morton, everybody that was anybody.
Yeah, right.
Guy Lombardo came here, Lawrence Welk, all kinds of people.
Later, several years.
No, about the same
time,
yeah. In the early 20s, 23, 24 of big times down here.
And the water, again, is right behind us. And how did that contribute to how this developed right here?
Well, the record sold, so they kept recording, and then, of course, Hoagie Carmichael came down here and recorded Stardust, the very first recording of it, and like that.
You know, there's some pretty hot names nowadays in rock groups. One of the recording bands that came here came out as Skillet Dick and his Frying Pans.
Oh, yeah, right.
That's a great name.
Oh, we had great names in those days, too.
We had. For yourself.
Oh, well, I enjoy it.
You're going to give your age away now
No, I
if you
won't.
talk about that.
I'm perfectly willing to lie about it.
Now, you talked about having worked down here as a teenager?
Yes, I was 14 years old when I went to work here. By the time I was 16, they had taught me how to tune in a building right there, a 2-story building, and here's where the pianos were finally finished in here, and the fine tuners took care of it there. So I was down here at the end of the 2-story building, which is about half a block down.
See.
And I could look out my window and see the recording studio every day.
Nice upbringing.
It was.
Nice place to learn about the history of all of this.
Doggone right. And there were still a lot of people around here that remembered some of the musicians that came here, and I was able to talk to them and about a lot of different things.
What do we think's going to happen down here?
Oh,
Do we know? What's the plan?
Let's rebuild the recording studio right here.
We talked about the Hollywood idea, even, of having them come down here and do a biographical history of what went on with jazz in Richmond.
If you put a replica studio up, you'd surely have something there that would attract people. They would love to stand on this very spot where Weiderbeck had played his horn, or Armstrong had played his horn, and maybe play into one of those tin horns in the wall that they used in those days, right, Sam?
Sure, let's do it.
Who are we going to talk to? You know people in Hollywood. Aren't you on your way out there in a couple of weeks anyway?
Yes, I'll be out there a week from Sunday.
Well, Martin Scorsese or...
I don't know, I just plan to overeat and work.
Your plan for Hollywood.
Yeah.
We want to thank you for joining us for this trip through the Gorge and talking about jazz history.
Chris Rogan's wardrobe supplied by The Secret Ingredient.